You are now listening to the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Almost. Major. Holy fucking shit, this is major!
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Almost Major, where we talk about the many major studios and the films they release. My name is Kevin Tudor. I'm here with Charlie Nash.
Hello.
And Bryden Doyle.
Hello.
And today we're talking about Buddies from 1985. We are on our 1980s New Line miniseries. Buddies was released in the U.S. in San Francisco on September 12th, 1985 at the Castro Theater, September 20th, 1985 in the Chicago Gay and Lesbian Film Festival, and November 15th, 1985 in New York City at the Film Forum. Budget of this was $27,000, and I do not know any of the box office information, but the top 5 films that weekend were Once Bitten. I don't know how that was number 1 before Jim Carrey became a thing. I also have not seen it. Jagged Edge. I feel like Bryden has watched that.
I've seen that movie. It
yeah?
sucks. Yeah,
okay.
It's boring.
Target, an Arthur Penn, Gene Hackman, Matt Dillon vehicle.
Oh, I watched that because my uncle once brought it up to me and said like that he rented that with my grandfather, and like my grandfather was like falling asleep in the first 20 minutes, and then Gene Hackman kills a guy at an airport and everything. My grandfather was like, this is exciting. We need to rewind the movie to the start of it and everything. And then 30 years later or whatever, my uncle was like, oh, we should watch this. And then we watched it and was like, I think that was more like the sentimental memory of watching it with my grandfather that made the movie go to my uncle and everything. But it was still nice.
I think it was just a loud noise that woke me up, and I thought it was good. And then number 4, Death Wish 3 and Back to the Future. I'm sure this was week 58 for Back to the Future, and now it's at number 5. Number 1 song in the U.S. this week, We Built This City by Starship, Go Away. The week before, the Miami Vice theme was number 1 song in the U.S.
Cool.
I mean, yeah, it kicks ass, but imagine a time where just I don't know. Although, no, if it was today and we were good, we would have made the Succession theme song go number 1. That would have been great. And number 1 song in Canada this week is Oh Sheila by Ready for the World. Plot description from Google. This is worded kind of oddly. A 25-year-old man volunteers to be a buddy to an AIDS patient, and he is assigned to a 32-year-old gay gardener. I don't remember them mentioning him. He's a gardener?
Yeah, they do, because Jeff Edholm's character, Robert, kind of mentions that everybody kind of has a political awakening in this movie, and you kind of realize that Robert was kind of awoken by Edward, his partner at the time's movement, and then that kind of, I feel like it's purposely meant to mirror how David is also kind of receives a call to action through his interaction with Robert. So, yeah.
32-year-old gay gardener abandoned by his friends and lovers. I think it's just lover in the final stage of AIDS.
Well, they have an open relationship.
Oh, that's right. Google is actually good. I'm just bad at remembering for some reason. He shares personal memories and insights with his volunteer caregiver. Okay, Google, I'm sorry. I was being a bit of a bitch. Directed, written, edited, and produced by Arthur J. Brazen Jr. Prior to this, Passing Strangers in 1974, Gay USA in 1977, and Abuse in 1983.
Did you know, real quick, that they were watching clips of Gay USA? Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
I stepped on Kevin's trivia.
And Passing Strangers as well.
God, I am annoying already, and what are we, a minute and 30 seconds into this thing? I need to shut up.
You're being thorough. It's good. Yeah.
He's triggered because the straight man is talking about...
This is the gayest movie that we've covered on this podcast yet, and I can't stand
What are you talking about? We've covered
washing.
Boat Trip. We've covered Boat Trip, and this is gayer?
I'm just glad there are no sharp objects near me. I'm just gonna say that.
I mentioned Boat Trip. Now Charlie's at a loss for words. I've done my job.
I'm gonna go drown myself in a tub.
Who is it in the ring? Those a toaster
Brian
in the
Cox.
tub. Who's that? Brian Cox.
Oh yeah,
You're gonna Brian Cox your ass.
Cox myself. This is totally insensitive. Apologies.
Starring. It's Jeff, not Geoff, right? Or is it Geoff?
I believe
Jeff.
Jeff is.
Yeah.
Jeff Edholm, which is very funny. Jeff Edholm as Robert Willow, and David Shakester as David Bennett. He's also in the movie Abuse. Does this New Line Cinema film have Lin Shaye? No, it barely has like 3 characters. She could have been in it though. I don't know.
She could have been. She could have been. She could have been the person who was interviewing David at the end.
That would kick ass.
That would have been amazing.
She's on the sidewalk when he's walking at the end. They should have had the tying game. Where's Lynn?
or she's one of the people with the picket signs.
Yeah, she grabs her own picket sign and it just says Lin Shaye with an arrow pointing
says,
down.
Hi, I'm Lin Shaye on it.
You're just like, there she is.
It. It's like Where's Waldo with New Line Cinema. Just Lin Shaye edition. I'm just imagining that one person who's just watching it. There she is. Yeah.
This movie's very heavy, so we need to make as much jokes as we can. Not at the movie's expense.
Not at the movie's expense. Please.
Trivia. Lead actor Geoff Edholm died of AIDS in 1989. This was the first film to deal with the AIDS pandemic in the early 1980s, preceding An Early Frost in 1985, which was a television movie by 2 months. This was the last film made by writer-director Arthur J. Breslin Jr., who died of AIDS at age 44 at 1987. Shot over the course of 9 days, all in sequence. All the hospital scenes were shot in 3 days. It was shot in May 1985, edited in July 1985, and then premiered in September. That's a 4-month turnaround. That's pretty nuts. The 2 lead actors rehearsed for 5 weeks prior to principal shooting on this film. As you were saying, that Gay USA and Forbidden Letters, is it? I think it's Passing Strangers is actually what they watch on the TV. Because I was watching it, I was like, I've seen Gay USA. I know what that is. The other movie, no, I have not.
Can I just say, at one point I was thinking, have I seen this one?
Well, it's funny because
it's like, is this a Wakefield Pool movie? Oh no, it's just one of Bresson's earlier movies. Not Robert Bresson, Arthur J. Bresson.
Oh, that'd be funny.
They're just watching,
just a donkey shows up.
They're just watching Art Balthazar in the hospital. That inspires hope.
Yeah. But no, it is funny. The other movies that Robert mentions that he watched, The Boys in Baltimore, which is, I could not find anything about, but The Bigger the Better is a real gay porn film from 1984. So
I have seen The Boys in the Sand, which is I was like, is this The Boys in the Sand? And
I looked up Boys in Baltimore every which way I could, and no, not actual. Somebody's got to run with that, you know.
Can I think this is okay to share. Kevin, we have both been to the Archive in Connecticut. My dear friend Sam Cohen, first time I ever went there, pulled out a bunch of Vinegar Syndrome Wakefield Pool adult film collections and was like, here, take these. And I was just
Sam,
like,
what are you trying to say?
But then I was like, am I gonna, like, you know, because I've worked at Newbury Comics before, and, like, you know, we've sold adult films there, but I've always been like, I've never been the one that's actually approached anyone at a cash register with this. And it was funny, I had a bunch of movies, like, just because it was the first time I'd ever been to the Archive, so of course I fucking went nuts just spending all my money there. And it was, you know, in the middle of the pandemic on top of that. So no comments on any of those movies. And then the people behind the counter were like, oh, Wakefield Pool, this stuff's great. And I was just like, oh,
I was about to say, you don't have to worry about that at the Archive because people come in daily buying porn and they're just like, oh yeah, cool, man.
Yeah, fucking love the Archive, by the way. Please go support them if you happen to be in the New England area. Sorry to cut you off, Brian.
No. You were making a sincere promotion of, like, what sounds like a wonderful place. I was gonna say, they're every day they're at that place. They're like Paul Rudd and 4-Year-Old Virgin. Take your box of porn.
You know, when you trade in movies at the Archive, you're just like, hey man, I got a big box of porn ready for you. They're just like, great, we'll take it.
Can I say one of the funniest things I did in Newbury Comics, because I worked at the Salmon Pond Mall in Marlborough, Massachusetts, was whenever there were underage kids looking at the adult film section, if you just stand behind them and then wait for them to turn around and them just like it was just always the most amusing thing to just have your arms crossed and then just have them fucking scatter.
They were just looking at all the titles. They were just like, man, do you think Mr. Krabs knows karate? And you were behind him like, bruh. I would just be behind him. If I was silently doing that, I'd be like, you should get that. That's a good one. And then they just run out.
Much like it is funny how like when I was working there, I hadn't bought any adult films at the time, and I did the exact thing that everybody does when they buy adult stuff, is that they have a stack of things and then they put those in the middle or on the bottom or close to the bottom. They never make it the last or first thing, so then they're just kind of like, and then you pull that out and everyone just kind of goes, and they turn around and it's like, no judgment, we sell the thing. Like, it's that thing. But then I become that person too when I'm just like, yeah.
No, if when we went, if I would have got that, which it doesn't really interest me. I understand the appeal, especially if it's vintage or whatnot. I do have 2 AGFA porn titles. One of them is Bad Pussy. There's that. And Sex Demon, which I believe is the gay porno parody of The Exorcist. But if I was going to do that, I'd be like, I'm making 2 transactions. My first one, just porn. Look me in my eyes while you fucking check that out.
I also love that you started out phrasing it like, if I was gonna get it, it's like, I already feel like you're lying to me when you're saying that.
If I was.
Hey man, I'm only buying this for other reasons. They're like, sure, man. You're like, no, I watched this as a film. They're like, sure, man. Like, I swear.
I also went to work one day, and this will come up probably later in the podcast, but I work for a mental health facility, and there was like one Monday or Tuesday morning where it was like 9 a.m. and we were all just pulling out our laptops, and my boss came in and was like, good morning, everyone. And we were like, good morning. And she was like, I have to go give a lecture on porn, and then just walked out of the office. And it was
for or against?
I would
For.
Oh,
okay.
No. No, are you kidding? Like, half the time we'll like if anybody complains about, like, I don't know how appropriate it is to talk about this stuff, but like, I've heard stories about people that we support because we are in touch with their family, and it's just kind of like, well, like, have you ever thought about supporting them by taking them to get like adult films before? And then like a family member will just be like, well, that's not appropriate. And it's like, he's spending money doing it anyway.
I have a feeling you would deal with like some older people that were just like, what, do you go and buy film canisters at some dingy alley? And be like, no, you can buy them. Funny on that tip is funny that I live in Oklahoma, and as soon as you drive south into Texas, as soon as you hit the like welcome to Texas sign, massive porn shop, because they're just like, welcome to the land of opportunity, son.
Kevin, remember when we got pulled over by a cop after we went to the archive, and we basically were like, it's a pornography store. I was buying pornography.
I would have never thought of that. Okay, last bit of trivia. The director is quoted in the Celluloid Closet book that was turned into a documentary. He said, quote, every once in a while you get the chance to make a statement on film that has nothing to do with your career, with ego, with money, but only with the issues of life and love and death. If Buddy turns out to be my last film, it'll be a fine way to go. And it was. And also to circle back around with the archive, Vinegar Syndrome has put out a Blu-ray of Buddies, and it looks fantastic.
It does. That's how I watched it.
Without
both
that
times
release,
I've
this
seen
movie
it.
would
Yeah.
be like very hard to find. So
I can barely remember half the things I want to say. But I'm thinking clearly now, and I think you ought to do it. Maybe somebody reads it and becomes more careful sexually. That knocks down their chances of getting it. Or somebody reads it and sends money to one of those gay centers. Or they get angry and they write a letter to the mayor and asks why more isn't being done.
initial thoughts. Yeah, this is a fantastic movie. I think through watching it, I realized that it's a movie about love and the government's refusal to reciprocate that. And I think that's what makes it even more heartbreaking. Love the dynamic of just how defensive and naive that David is. Like when he's like, I just imagine an AIDS patient would be more serious. And how open Robert is, where David's talking about, like, yeah, I had 3 friends who, and he's like, Robert's like, died. You can say died. And how David starts to realize it, like, during the scene where he shows him the article about that he's working on where AIDS is a disease from God. And he was just like, I don't know why you're freaking out. And he's just like, do you not understand? Where he has the line, he'd sooner rather die than shut up. And I thought that was great. The score on this is like so fucking sad.
Yeah.
It's really sad, especially at the very end. Notice this time on rewatch that how it delves into how definitive the written word is. Like the gay magazine that David writes for that upsets Robert, that he just thinks that he's just writing, and it's just like, you know, just everybody's type of opinion. And it's just like, you don't understand what you're putting out there. The article that David contributes to at the end, the list of deceased at the beginning and end, and the shots of the contagion rules. There's just a lot of like when that article that David contributes to, and whenever it's going through the printer, it just feels like it just like hits every single time. Also, I mean, this is a spoiler, but you know, just how stark and cold Robert's death is. It's just very matter of fact. The empty room, David not even knowing until he shows up. There's no dramatic, like, slow death scene. It just happens. The director said he wanted it to be his Ingmar Bergman movie, so lots of long takes and no flashy cinematography. And I think that works wonders to nail home the fact that this movie is about AIDS. This is what's happening. There's nothing that you can look away from. Like, this is it. So it's also just fascinating that, thankfully, the first movie about AIDS was from a gay director who unfortunately succumbed to that. And it's pretty fucking fantastic. So
For those of you who don't know, if this is your first time listening to this is Charlie. I am gay. I don't think I've ever said that before in front of anybody ever, let alone in front of a microphone. There is something about movies like this that there's gay cinema, but then there's also like, I don't mean to sound super pretentious here, but this doesn't feel so much. Obviously it is a fictional work and it's a dramatic work, but considering the context of one of the stars and the directors succumbing to AIDS and then them being sadly taken from us years later, it doesn't just feel like any type of movie that we usually talk about on this podcast. It feels like, especially in 1985 when, you know, the pandemic was in one of the worst stages and Ronald Reagan was doing jack shit to save anybody, and you know, the government just completely turned on the gay community, and not just the gay community but people of color and a bunch of you know, everybody who was, you know, who, you know, contracted this disease. There is a sense of privilege that I feel in being alive when I am right now. I, you know, wasn't born that much later after this, but I wasn't around back then, so this feels very much like a primary document of what it felt like to live through this time, where not that I wasn't around, but that I did, you know, I didn't live through this horrific part of queer history where just everyone felt like they were completely helpless and screaming into the void, and just nobody was doing anything. And so I think there is a part of me that, like, thinking about this part of history just makes me so sad, just knowing that this existed. I mean, the very first thing you see in this movie is just a list of names and just the words deceased, AIDS. And that in and of itself is so powerful, just seeing, you know, names of lives that were lost that our government completely fucking ignored, you know, that were crying out for help and that we did nothing. And there's just, you know, obviously I'm carrying my own perspective and baggage into this, but like there is something about making an AIDS movie today and making an AIDS movie that came out right around the time that it was happening, by people who were queer, by people who were not famous, by people who had no clout whatsoever. And this does feel like a call to action and a cry for help, and also finding the smallest sense of beauty and community even between these two characters who, even David, when he drove me nuts, I saw parts of myself in him that I didn't want to see, that I didn't want to recognize when I first came out, where he's just like, what? We don't have to throw, like, I don't have to like scream it out into the world that I'm gay. Like, I'm fine being who I am, but you know, we don't have to make a big parade about it. And just even those annoying parts of myself that really drove me nuts this time, with David's character being like, what? I don't have to be like loud about it. And then everything that Robert says of like, well, yeah, but like, don't you want to be like, it wouldn't be this way if they didn't just accept us. Like, we didn't make these terms. Like, we are announcing that we're here. That sort of stuff really resonated with me because I remember just feeling the overwhelming sense of shame of just coming out in general and feeling like that was good enough. And then learning that the world isn't just about you and your personal shame of struggles with coming to terms with your own sexuality. It's bigger than you. And I feel like this movie, especially considering, you know, what was going on in the world, is also about David learning that it's not just about coming to terms with your sexuality. It's about coming to terms with the fact that the world is not doing anything to help you. Just because you accept yourself in that moment doesn't mean that that's going to solve everything, and that sometimes it takes more than just coming to terms with the fact that the world doesn't like you for who you are and that you need to come to terms with yourself. Sometimes in order to make the world a better place, you need to find that sense of community and make yourself loud in order to say we're not going the hell away and we are human beings. And I'm getting so fucking corny and sentimental right now, but like, there is a really urgent call to action that this movie really does beautifully convey, that still, sadly, I mean, obviously AIDS is still around, but like, we're recording this in September of 2024. I mean, for fuck's sake, Donald Trump might get elected in like 2 months. Like, you know, it's sad that these types of things could still, we are still threatened by, maybe not, maybe the threats have changed in certain ways and we become more like socially conscious and aware of just how we let this pandemic just wipe out millions and millions of people, but like our civil rights are still on the line. And
You're all making good notes. That's all good.
Yeah, I know. It's just,
especially with something like this,
point.
it's got to be a bunch of, there's a lot of feelings. So just,
I can see people saying that this movie is such a time capsule, or that it's not that dramatically dynamic, or, you know, it's very blunt. But you know what? Sometimes when it comes to socially conscious cultural timestamps like this, we need these types of movies to look back on and see where we were, what was the state of our of the queer community, of our country, where we were, how these types of people, how these like, you know, how Arthur J. Bresson and, you know, his actors, like, it's I feel like this is like the most like fucking self-important and pretentious I'm ever gonna sound on this podcast, maybe ever, but like, it really does feel like more than just like a fucking dramatic piece of storytelling. It feels very much like a political, it feels like a document that really does, like, this is where we were, these are the people who paved the way for us to be where we are today, to feel safer, to feel heard, to feel seen. And this sort of stuff is important. And in terms of the dramatic storytelling, just in general, because I feel like I've been a little vague here, I think that the relationship between David Schachter and Jeff Edholm, a very psychologically realistic portrait of someone who is younger, who has come out of the closet, who is like, I have fully accepted who I am and I am totally comfortable in my skin, and then is secretly dealing with some forms of internalized homophobia that he hasn't come with, or hasn't come to terms with, and then also just a mournful, sad portrait of Robert, the life that he had, but also the life that could have continued to be. And I think that the movie does him justice too by juxtaposing like the opening with the names of the people who passed away with just a beautiful portrait of him on the beach, and like, this is who he was. He's not just this person in bed. This is the life he had. He had a full fucking life. There's all sorts of, you know, sure, maybe they're simple and maybe they're not exactly exciting ways to tell a dramatic story, but they're simple images, which is basically what movies are, just expressing just how much life there was in this one person who was sadly taken away from us by a disease that our government did not do anything to prevent or even cure or help him during his time of need. You know, I mean, it breaks my heart, and I feel like I'm also not trying to like be the one and only, like I'm not trying to sound like this self-important like asshole here, but it I don't know, I can't, there is something about this movie that feels different than other movies that we've covered, because I feel like the type of movies we get now that are in the same vein are things like Dallas Buyers Club. I mean, I know that was 10 years ago, but like,
You were on such a good run. What did you do? You had to bring up Dallas Buyers. No, I totally
I don't know.
agree.
Like, I mean, let me just say this. Without this movie, certain things, like, I don't think Philadelphia would have existed without movies like this. You know,
No.
Well, even
And
I'm watching ER, which was like an ABC show on like, you know, network TV, and there's like I've watched like the first 3 seasons of that, and like there's like been multiple subplots about AIDS, like in that, like where like they're dealing with AIDS patients and talking about it like openly, and it's like I mean, that's like like less than 10 years after this, like you said, like these movies like paved the way for it. It's like, of course, for that kind of storytelling. Yeah.
I will say with Dallas Buyers Club, what you're trying to say is those movies are a lot more self-important than this is.
Well, they're self-important and like they're basically like, we need to present this in the most safe kind of Hollywoodized type of,
It's made for straight people.
We need to take the relatable heterosexual character, and then we need to, you know, but it doesn't deal with certain sexual frankness, frankly. I mean, even the sex scenes in this movie are not about the titillation. It's literally just like, you know, helping someone feel connected and with their sexuality, not even in a way. I mean, obviously there are scenes where David definitely fantasizes about Robert, and that's understandable, but like it's not like they just start making out or like, you know, stuff like that. It's like more about helping Robert feel in tune with himself. We can get into that scene later. There's a sexual frankness that is about intimacy as opposed to just making it sensually approachable for the viewer. Yeah, okay, it's blunt and straightforward to if people want to attack it for that, but I honestly think it's one of those things where if you have criticisms about this thing, I kind of feel like you're using time travel logic, and that's not really fair considering when this movie came out. And also just in terms of the craftsmanship, I mean, so many slow pan close-ups of Robert's face that I found insanely effective, because if this thing were flashier, I think that the message would be lost. So
I mean, you were saying it's a time capsule, or some people might use that as a downer for it, as opposed to time capsules are great. If it's dated, that's a good thing. It doesn't need to be like... And I say this as
someone who wasn't alive when this movie came out, too.
Right.
So, you know, like...
I'm not saying this is a movie that you couldn't watch and just be like, it's kind of boring. Like, any type, you could say stuff like that, but if you're turned off by the bluntness, it's just like, what the fuck do you expect? It's made by gay men who are dealing with this at the time. Do you expect them to just be like, we would like some help when you have the time? Like, I admire this movie for just being like, yeah, this is going on. Shit needs to, because that shot at the end, that is not a movie set scene. That's the actor doing that, and everybody around him thinks he's actually protesting. That's what makes it so fucking heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Because everybody's looking at the sign, they're probably just like, oh man, I'm just trying to be in DC. Now you're making me think of AIDS. And it's just like, that's even worse about it. Because I think it's a year after this movie came out, which this isn't, unfortunately, an influential movie at the time, because like nobody saw it. I don't know what the home video imprint that it has. Of course, now it has a Blu-ray and is more easily watchable after it was restored like 5-6 years ago or something like that. But yeah, if the fact that it's dated, I would say, you were talking about this, the fact that it's dated is a good thing, but also it's not dated, because if you just take out AIDS and put it in with another thing affecting the gay community, it's the same movie. Like, it's unfortunately very precedent, but very timely at the same time. So the fact that it does take place in 85 and is very much an 85 movie, it's still very much a 93 movie or 95 movie when AIDS was still going strong, unfortunately. Yeah, I think the very bluntness of this movie is its biggest power, because like that quote that I had from the director was just like, if I can just make this, and he has the luxury, not even the luxury, it was made for 20 grand, it has the luxury to be able to tell somebody about what's going on, or maybe, because it's the same thing with whenever David's like, I don't want to do the fucking article, it's nobody's business. He was just like, you could maybe potentially change somebody's mind with this, or get somebody to understand. And then that's kind of the whole movie and a gist. Or even if you're just like, well, I already know about this, so you're not teaching me anything. It's not trying to teach, but it is trying to open up people's minds through the David character, who is very ignorant, but learns to change his ways and whatnot, because he's also the type of person that's just like, yeah, I'm gay, but I don't want people to know what we do in the bedroom. It's just like, he has that idea where straight people around that time were just like, if they see gay people, they think about sex, but that's not what it is, But also, this movie does not shy away from lust and all of that type of stuff. And I think that's also a beautiful part of it. It's just like, just because he's dying of AIDS doesn't mean he's a miserable guy in a bed. He is, but he also has the same feelings he had before, and just like how everybody else does.
And David even, it annoyed me, but in a good way, because it is such a, people will talk like this all the time, where he's just like, God, I don't even know if I like him, like he's got this smug, sense of humor where he's just kind of above everything. And it's just like, well, yeah, dude, what the fuck is he supposed to do? like, come on.
Yeah, especially, which I didn't even clock their ages when I was watching it. I could assume David is younger, but
David
I didn't.
is 25, I
and
think he says.
Robert is 32, and he's only
Right.
I mean, what's also startling to think about, I guess, is just how quickly he's described as deteriorating. He's only had the virus for a year, but he's already at death's door because of it. And I guess that happened to a lot of people, which is just I can't imagine how scary that must have been. It's just how quickly people fell apart because of it. It's
yeah. And as you said, Kevin, too, obviously this is still going around. There is no cure for it. Obviously people have learned to live with it, but it's not that it has permanently gone away.
It's not a pandemic anymore. Yeah. Thankfully, but still plenty to do about. But yeah, I think the fucking I'm not saying that you think that you were creating somebody that would take this movie for being dated. It's just not every movie needs to be timeless, but also that's the beauty of this movie, is that it is a time capsule, and time capsule is not a negative word. But I said, this could take place in 93, it could take out one or two words, and it could unfortunately be still prescient.
I will also say about the bluntness, it's yeah, but the movie addresses that, where it's David's diary, he's writing it because he doesn't want to be filtering his thoughts, because he feels he wants to be honest with himself and with other people and everything, but he feels he doesn't do that. And when he talks to people, and he feels writing in this journal will help him get to the heart of matters and express his thoughts more clearly. So that's why it's so blunt. They explain it in the movie. It's not that hard to miss. It's so it totally works. It makes sense. And Robert is getting him to be, is also encouraging him to be blunt, because he's very matter of fact about his situation or anything. Like you say, Kevin, you say the scene where he's saying you've had friends, I've had friends who, and he can't even bring himself to finish words, and Robert's died. You can talk about it. It's let's be upfront about this. Yeah, this is a very good movie. It is also a curious thing where the movie is, I find this film very moving, but it is also it's because it's about emotion breaking through for these people, and seeing them as human when they're so often viewed as statistics or data, or people that they want to just hide away. I mean, think about the scene where David goes to pick up Robert's things, and like you said, we learn more about Robert through these photographs and everything, but they're all put in a box by his roommate, who is afraid about getting sick and everything, and doesn't want to see him and everything. Just don't talk about it, don't put him, we just don't want to think about this issue. It's how often there's the scene where David's at his office alone, he's typing up the galleys. There's something so mundane about how these characters are made to feel when like there's so much suffering and everything, or how they're perceived as so mundane, like by like just being like put into like their data that's being, their words that are being entered into a computer, or like it's data that's being printed on a sheet. And you know, like when Robert passes away and everything, like the office is still like the hospital is like still sort of like just churning along, like, you know, saying like, can we get an EKG to like this thing, like you hear like, and like how so much of like it's disarming too how so many of the characters are off screen and everything. There is like this very gets at how so many of these interactions, especially with Robert, are so depersonalized, and like it really, as a point of contrast.
Do you mean David?
You're right with David, but also like even like the nurse who comes to like, you know, take care of Robert and everything.
Oh,
you
yeah.
never see her and everything, and it really like I think that's a stark contrast with how intimate like at like the close-ups and like the shot for shot and like the two shots with Robert and David are like, it really is like a stark contrast, and like gets home the emotional impact. Please, go ahead.
Just real quick, I couldn't help but think about, and I'm sorry to interrupt, I just couldn't help but think about how David talks about how much he loves Steve, and like Steve for a big chunk of the movie is only heard off camera, and then the one time that Steve is on camera, he's behind a shower curtain, and the one time that they're like intimate with one another, it's obscured by the shower curtain, and we can see enough of him, but that's still like kind of allegorical for how David is like, no, I'm out and I'm fine and my parents accept me, and you know, we never see his mom's always over the phone, and then the one time that, you know, he's still with his boyfriend, it can't be a coincidence that he's still obscured by an object, and the one time, you know.
Well, yeah, and
so
in that scene they're talking about how like when they're together he's starting to fantasize about Robert when they're together and everything, so it's like showing how the boyfriend, even though he's there, it's like it's not quite at the forefront of his mind and his concerns at that moment. This is gonna be, it seemed like it may be a weird tangent, but like I think I like just like hitting on how like the emotion breaking through these characters being presented as data, or being like treated as data, or not being treated at all. At the time that I had seen this movie, I watched this for the first time about like 10 months ago or something. Then in the time since then, this is a movie that came years later, and I'm not saying it's influenced at all by Buddies. The Richard Linklater adaptation of A Scanner Darkly. I haven't read the book, but that movie deals with like people who are, you know, being mistreated or ignored because of drug addiction. I'm not trying to draw like a comparison between AIDS, but like and addiction, of course. Although, of course, you know, people can contract AIDS because of, you know, drug use. That's a whole other thing. But that movie, A Scanner Darkly, ends similar to Buddies, with this dedication that I find like intensely moving. That movie just like hits me with a wave of emotion. This is the text. If I may read this quote: "This has been a story about people who were punished entirely too much for what they did. I love them all. Here is a list to whom I dedicate my love." And then there's like a list of names, and it's interesting. It kind of like Buddies. There's the scene where like all this information about is like being like appearing across the screen like it's being typed in the moment. And there's like a long list of people. And Buddies, you know, there's the whole scene where like it gets up to like 400 names, I think, of people who have passed away from the disease, and you know, at the end of Scanner Darkly, like there's like a whole list of names, and then it just says and so forth, kind of hitting home the point of like how like there's like certain things in the world that like, you know, it's just like the tragedy is like too much to even like, you know, contain it in a list. And then it says, "In memoriam, these were comrades whom I had. There are no better. They remain in my mind, and the enemy will never be forgiven. The enemy was their mistake in playing. Let them play again in some other way, and let them be happy." And I don't know. I find that it's similar in a similar way. I'm so moved by how like this movie is like, you know, does have like it's kind of like the contrast of like how the names, just like in the, there's so many of them and everything, like it almost like is overwhelming, and like but like the fact that their names are even there, and that there is like an acknowledgement of what's happening to them, there is like, you know, a lot of love that's being like conveyed for all the people who are lost to this disease because of neglect. And just I find it really quite moving. For such a talky movie, I think it is, you know, there is like to run the risk of like, you know, oh, it's just like, you know, generic shot, reverse shot. I don't think that's the case here. I think it's even like comes across in subtle ways, like showing the connection between Robert and David. There's the scene, I don't remember the specific scene, but there's a scene where like they're having like, you know, sort of, they're kind of at odds ideologically. There's like a particular sort of like tone of background noise when the camera's focused on David, And when you cut to Robert, it's like a different type of like background noise. Like it's almost like you're kind of in different spaces, even though they're in the same room. It's like they're occupying different spaces in their shot reverse shot. And then as Robert starts to make a point that gets through to David, he's talking and his audio carries over into like the next shot of like, you know, like the over the shoulder scene David, and it's like they're occupying the same space now, not just like visually but also orally, how like they're sort of like it's like they're occupying the same space as they're sort of starting to get through to each other. I don't know. I maybe perhaps reading too much into that, but like, but no, I just it's an interesting way to read that scene, I think.
I mean, yeah. I think there's a lot of that with, especially at the beginning, the way that it would frame Robert feeling like he's alone in his suffering when it comes to trying to connect with David. And it isn't until, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but this is just something that I thought about. It isn't until the masturbation scene where David massages him that David starts being in the frame with him more often, even in the background, whether it's because at first it's just his hands on his shoulders. And again, it's not even meant to be, you know, it's not even meant to be like, this will help get you off. It's just meant to be like,
he's just there for him.
He's just there for him and helping him connect with his own body, because he talks about how he felt so much guilt and shame and masturbating and how he felt completely disconnected from his body. Like, much like how I can only imagine how people felt that they're losing agency of their own body when they've, you know, when succumbing to a disease like this. And yeah, just how David would be in the background of the frame when Robert would be connecting with him throughout the remainder of that, of the movie, and how, yeah, just subtle framing and stuff like that is cinematic and is conveying not just what is being said by the characters, but how they're how their bond is helping them throughout this fucking horrific time. That, and I guess the reason that I kept harping on, you know, why I'm worried about this being a time capsule is, as someone who's like, we live in an age where online dating exists and Grindr exists and stuff like that. And it's just like, I don't know. I'm worried that not understanding certain people and certain movements and certain art that helped us pave the way to get where we are, to feel this safe or safer, I should say. Like, that's why I think that certain works like this are so important, and they feel like they kind of transcend just being a movie. They feel like artifacts, frankly. And I don't know, me getting all mushy gushy sentimental here, but
no,
you know,
I think that's a great point. Sorry, I didn't mean to step on your points at all.
No, you didn't.
One interesting thing too is with this movie, because you mentioned some of the other things that came along later. The interesting thing with a movie like Philadelphia, which, you know, came later and was has big movie stars, and like you said, I think you mentioned like a movie like Dallas Buyers Club, where there's like a heterosexual lead character, just sort of for like maybe like saying like, well, it's you know, it's about this person too. But a movie like Philadelphia too, like I'm not gonna speak for everyone or anything, but like that movie at least is like sort of has like sort of a genre package, and then it's like a courtroom drama as well, where it's like got big scenes where like, you know, Denzel Washington is like being very charismatic and yelling to Bradley Whitford, "Are you gay?" in court. And whereas a movie like Buddies, I mean, it makes it a bit of a tough sit, but like it is also just like so unblinking and matter of fact, and really just sort of like dealing with it. There's not like a genre package to it. There's no like sort of like formulaic narrative. It is just sort of like very unblinking about like watching this person in their final moments and dealing with like what they take away from life. It makes it a tougher sit, but it is like, and I'm not like trying to say it's better or worse than any type of movie that deals with this issue, but it is like a very, like you said, it does distinguish it in its way as an artifact, like you said, or and like as a work of film. Yeah,
it's incredible how it is so raw and so emotionally charged, and yet it never feels treacly or manipulative. Obviously all movies are manipulation, but like it doesn't have that sense of like, obviously it feels like it's pulling at your heartstrings to get at more than just getting a dramatic arc. It's like, you know, it's kind of as much a celebration of life as it is kind of a scream into the void of where we were in our country's history. And yeah, not to sound, you know, not to get on my self-important high horse or anything.
You're not sounding self-important at all,
it,
Charlie. It's all good.
yeah, it's just, you know, okay.
So what's more of a call to action, this movie or another movie we covered, Fahrenheit 9/11?
Oh God,
I had to say it. I'm sorry. Don't answer
Goodness,
that. That's
Kevin.
not a serious question. It also kind of, just as far as like New Line Cinema putting this out. I mean, we've covered, at this point, we only have the Nightmare on Elm Street movies to cover, but this is a big outlier. I don't even think we've covered anything dramatic besides the two French movies we covered. And even that, they're kind of jokey.
And
you know,
also,
this is full
we're talking
drama.
about like how much effort did New Line put into putting this movie out so that it got widely seen? Like, I mean, like that's the other question. Like,
It was just a New York and San Francisco release, but
I mean, I couldn't help but think about the same thing, though, Kevin. I mean, mostly what we've been covering during this miniseries has been genre exercises. I mean, and it's not like, look, the John Waters films we've covered also high cultural, social importance. I'm not saying that they don't have their place either. It's just that this one is like directly taking that stuff head on, you know, like in a different way. Not like you know, not like genre exercises aren't important works of social commentary either, but this is just like, you know, this is not meant to be quote unquote entertainment. You know,
you can't
like,
watch this movie and be like, I actually think that movie is about like and he's like, no, it's about one thing.
Yeah.
There's no deeper meaning. There's no metaphors. It's about what it is.
It's the type of movie where, like, I can't imagine seeing this in a theater and being like, I need to go get in line for popcorn. Like, I wouldn't want to be, like, making noise watching this movie in any sense. Like, God, that sounded worse than I meant when I initially
No, but it's totally true.
You know, like...
It's also, the movie's like, what, 78 minutes, and it doesn't feel, like, stretched thin at all. It feels like you get everything you need. It's very, yeah, like you said, it's blunt, but also it's like it makes its point. It's I don't know. It's very to the point in a way that I think is that feels. It's very germane. I don't know. I don't know.
But you can imagine you can imagine Hollywood making a similar type of movie with a bigger budget and bigger stars and having this be like phony baloney.
Sounds
garbage.
bad. Don't want it.
Yeah, like, but there is something about the bare bones minimalist approach and the sincerity here that is just so achingly raw.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Almost Major. Please rate, review, and subscribe to us on iTunes. Please follow the pod on Twitter at Almost Major to keep up to date with what movies we will be covering in the future. Myself, I can be found on Twitter and Letterboxd at KevBonesy. Bryden can be found on Twitter at Bryden Doyle and on Letterboxd at JDoyle. Charlie can be found on Twitter and Letterboxd at CTNash91. Once again, thank you for listening.
If you're looking for more horror outside of the mainstream, look no further than Unsung Horrors, a podcast about underseen horror movies. I'm Lance.
And I'm Erica. Every other week, we'll cover a horror movie with fewer than 1,000 views on Letterboxd. We'll even give you double feature recommendations to pair with the movies we discuss.
From gothic to shot on video, from slashers to comedies, from giallo to J-horror, we'll cover all the subgenres. So join us as we unearth these hidden gems of horror.
Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all at Unsung Horrors, available wherever you listen to podcasts. And part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Thank you for listening. To hear more shows from the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network, please select the link in the description